I met Runa, so unlike some of the previous speakers, I can't tell about the times that we got really drunk together and all the foolish things she did. And I learned a little bit about her history though. Runa is from Oslo, Norway originally, birthplace of many a great hacker. And Runa recently came to the US, came to DC, and is now working at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Did I get that right?
Yes.
But Runa's had a lot of experience kind of in the mix of security and privacy. She worked on Tor for a few years. You worked on the TrueCrypt Audit project, which is still going on, or kind of,
It is.
you know, some stuff happened there. Very interested in privacy, and she probably files more FOIA requests than all the rest of us combined. I think it's what, like 6 or 7 per second file.
I've got about 80 or 90 currently pending. So.
Currently pending. How many total?
What's the oldest one?
It's about 100. Oldest one, probably a year. I had one that was a year and a half, and they finally got back to me with some documents.
What's the most interesting one that you've got a response on?
The most interesting one is probably one from the FBI. It was the FBI's counterterrorism division that was talking about, it's like a bulletin, talking about Tor and Bitcoin and how it was used by extremists to buy weapons of mass destruction.
Exactly. So you guys are all on the watch list. So welcome to the Tor talk, and you're all getting free Bitcoin at the end. So you'll all be labeled extremists. And very, very sorry. I think Runa also made fake boarding passes at one time. And she's got a cool stamp that you can stamp on your boarding pass. That's the SSS symbol, which I've become very familiar with. You can stamp it on your boarding pass and you get a free massage from the TSA. It's really cool. So without further ado, I'll introduce Runa and she'll give you a quick overview of what she's talking about today.
Thanks. Thanks to Duo for having me. Yeah, the 4 S's, I don't know if anyone's actually had that on their boarding pass apart from you, but it does mean that you're pulled into a, they say it's random, sort of not random, secondary screening before boarding, usually when flying to the US, sometimes when flying within the US as well. And so I made this stamp that has just the 4 S's. You can just stamp other people's boarding passes. The trick is, you know, it's sort of a cool project. I get sort of excited. I tell people I have this stamp, but now no one gives me their boarding passes. So I have not had the opportunity to test it. But maybe one day we can convince a bunch of people to all write 4 S's on their boarding pass before heading to the airport and we'll see what happens.
Don't you fly out tomorrow?
I do.
First guinea pig.
Yeah, we can try it out. What else? So yeah, this presentation it's exactly the same deck as I used at Converge last month. The presentation will be sort of similar, but not. There's a lot of bits and pieces that I can talk about now that I couldn't really say much about a month ago. I also like to, instead of me standing here talking for forever, like to have more of a discussion. So feel free to raise your hand and ask questions whenever. I hear the microphone and the camera should be able to pick up you guys, and then I can try and repeat the questions if necessary.
The other thing I missed, I forgot to announce at the beginning, but if you're on the live stream, you can type in questions on the live stream that we can ask to Runa, or if you hashtag Duo Tech Talk or Duo Tech Talks, one of the two, we can relay those questions to Runa and she'll be able to answer them.
Okay, so there are questions online as well. Oh yeah, and just quickly about the TrueCrypt audit. I am just on the technical advisory board, so I don't actually do the audit. But the first phase of the audit looked more at the code and didn't really find anything that suggested a backdoor. The second phase of the audit, it was decided shortly after TrueCrypt updated its website to say that we're done, this is not safe to use anymore. And it was decided that the second phase, which is the crypt analysis, will move forward. And I think maybe by the end of the year, there will be a report out from that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there and whether or not someone will actually pick up TrueCrypt again. So I currently work with Freedom of the Press Foundation. but for many years I was a developer, researcher, support assistant, anything and everything for the Tor project. So I got involved with Tor in 2009 when I did Google's Summer of Code. So essentially I worked for the Tor project, got paid by Google for the summer, and ended up volunteering for about 10 months or so before I was offered a part-time contract and turned into a full-time contract. And it was anything from security research and development to training of journalists was something that I spent a lot of time doing. I did a forensic analysis of the Tor browser. So the idea is you start your computer, you download and use the Tor browser to do whatever you want to do, and then you shut down your computer. If someone were to get a hold of your hard drive at that point, assuming it's unencrypted, what would they be able to learn about your Tor browsing? The result was not, you wouldn't be able to learn a lot. The only thing that you could learn is that this person used Tor, which isn't really a big deal. It's not going to leave any trace of which sites you visited at what point, or anything like that. And I also I started the Tor help desk at one point and ended up also hiring a team of people to do that so I could do more fun things. About a month ago, I joined Freedom of the Press Foundation, which has two major sort of projects that they're working on. One is helping projects that don't really have a sort of set up donation infrastructure, help them actually receive donations. So in the case of WikiLeaks, where in a lot of cases you cannot donate to WikiLeaks, you can donate to them through Freedom of the Press Foundation instead. You can also donate to projects like Tails through Freedom of the Press Foundation. And every now and then, push the button. Every now and then, Freedom of the Press Foundation will run sort of crowdfunding bundles, where right now there's one for encryption tools for journalists. So you can donate, say, $100, and you can spread that evenly between the Tor project, Tails, Leap, and I think one more. The second part of the work that we do is SecureDrop, which is this anonymous whistleblowing submission system that uses Tor, that I figured I'd talk about a bit later on. But it's been around for about a year now, and it uses Tor for a lot of different things. And we have about 12 deployments, most of them in the US, but the system is used by a lot of media organizations, and a lot of them have said that they have received good information, credible information that they have been able to use for stories. I also, every now and then, write for Forbes. So there's been this issue among the media over the past couple of years that something happens with Tor and they run out and write the craziest article they can think of. And in this case, I figured I would beat them to it and set the record straight. So this was December last year. It was a Harvard student that decided that he did not want to sit his exam. And so he figured, how can I get out of this? So he figured, okay, I'll just use Tor, find this anonymous email service, I'll send a bomb thread to Harvard, I'll cancel the exam, and everything is good, right? Well, by the end of that day, he got caught. And the story was quickly, I think there was a couple of papers that sort of started spinning out the story with headlines with like, Harvard and the FBI break Tor, or Tor is hacked, which wasn't really the case. What happened here was that, so he got on Harvard's wireless network at like super early in the morning, used Tor, went to Guerrilla Mail, which does allow you to send emails over Tor, and the IP address that is left in the header is that of the Tor exit relay. So technically you're still good. But the trick here is that he was using Tor early in the morning on the university network. And to get on the network, you have to authenticate with a username and password. So how many people are using Tor early in the morning on the university network? Clearly not a lot, because when the FBI questioned him, he confessed.
Not many people are early in the morning, not many people are using Tor, and not many people are early in the morning using Tor that are in that class.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, if you confess to a crime, then hacking Tor, I'd say those are two different things. And so I know there was a guy that at DEF CON this year gave a talk about different scenarios where people have used Tor to do sketchy things that have gotten caught, and the problem was never Tor itself, it was that they just screwed it up somehow. I don't know if anyone saw that talk.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
have a question kind of related to that because I wanted to ask it at DEF CON, but I was too afraid of getting hacked in the meantime.
Okay.
When you're a beginner learning, security, you make mistakes. If you're a beginner in anything, you make mistakes. You look at DPR, Dread Private Roberts, and how like the Stack Overflow 4 years beforehand. So how do you combine the fact that you need to have great OPSEC day one mixed with the fact that you're a beginner and you don't know shit about OPSEC to begin with in order to not have things like this happen? Because I have an exam on Monday and it'd be great if I could. Just kidding about that.
No, I mean, it is.
Go to Starbucks.
So it is a really good question, and it sort of ties into SecureDrop. So say you set up this system that can allow people to use Tor to safely leak you documents. But how do you, well, first of all, you have to teach them that they have to use Tor to do so. And then they probably shouldn't do it from work, and they probably shouldn't do it from home. They should probably go to some random Starbucks somewhere else. But then the problem becomes, how do you teach people that they should do all of these things before leaking or before doing anything? And then to make it even more complicated, there was a talk by Bart Gellman was on a panel at Hope where he made the really good point that some of his best sources don't think of themselves as whistleblowers. They think that, oh, I'm just adding some more context to his story, it's okay, I'm not really revealing anything, it's not a secret. So if you don't see yourself as a source, if you don't see yourself as a whistleblower, if you don't think that you need this level of OPSEC, how are you going to find it in the first place? And that is a problem that I don't think anyone has solved yet. So, how many of you used Tor before 2010? It's actually a lot of people. Right. So, this is what the Tor browser looks like today. When you run Tor on your computer, you will see this tiny window. You click connect, it does its thing, and then you get this browser. And anything you do within this browser goes through Tor. Anything you do in any other window, any other app on your computer is not through Tor unless you've specifically configured it to do that way. Now, in 2009, when I first joined the Tor project, using Tor meant that you had to download the Tor software, you had to download Firefox, you had to download the Tor button extension, and then plug all three components in neatly and get them to play nicely together, and then hope that nothing goes wrong. So I think to see this in just 4 or 5 years is amazing. I think the team has done a fantastic job in making the Tor browser easier to use, less likely that users will actually screw up. Because the problem was always, if you can change something, you will stand out. If you can change something, there's a higher likelihood that you will actually screw up somewhere along the way. And right now, there's almost no place that you can actually make any changes. You need to be you need to be aware of what kind of changes you want to make before you can actually go do it, at which point, hopefully you know that making those changes aren't necessarily a good idea. So, Tor's been around for about 12 years. It was initially a US naval research project where they wanted this tool that would allow them to have anonymous communications. So they came up with this system, and then they ran into this problem that if they have this closed system that allows connections to be anonymous, but only the US Naval Research Lab or only the US Navy or US government are the ones using this system, they're not really that anonymous. So they decided to open source the code, and over the past 12 years, the network has grown to 6,000 relays, and I'll explain on the next slide what that is, and 1 million users all over the world. And that just keeps on growing. I know the EFF is currently running it's like an EFF relay challenge where they're encouraging people to set up servers and contribute to the network. And I think if you're running for a year, you get a cool sticker or something like that. Something fancy.
Freedom.
Freedom, yes. So, okay, let's look at how Tor works as when you're using it as a user. The first thing that happens when you start Tor on your computer is that Tor will connect to one of the directory authorities and download what's called a consensus. The consensus will include the IP address of every single relay, which is a server in the Tor network. And from that point on, Tor will select 3 servers out of 6,000 that it will use, and then it will build a circuit or a path from your computer through each of those 3 servers, and then finally to the website that you're trying to visit. So when you're then, say that you want to visit google.com, what happens then is that your Tor client will take the message, which is I want to visit google.com, and it will wrap it in 3 layers of encryption. So the innermost layer will be encrypted to a key that your Tor client, the Tor on your computer, has negotiated with the 3rd server, with this one. Then the second layer, it's a separate layer with a separate key that only this server and your Tor client knows about, and then similar for the outermost layer, which is a separate key again for the first hop or the first relay in your computer. So when this big blob of data then goes from your computer to the first server only having that one key can only peel off that first layer. And the first server will see, okay, it came from Runa and it's going to this other relay, so it will pass it on. The second relay will then peel off that second layer, and it can see that this big blob of data came from a server in the Tor network, and it's going to another server in the Tor network, and so it will pass it on. And then the third server can then peel off that final layer and see that it came from somewhere in the Tor network and it's going to google.com. So with that model, there is no single hop in this chain that knows Runa is using Tor to visit google.com. And there are 6,000 relays. You use 3 at a time, and you switch every 10 minutes. And all 1 million users are doing exactly this. The servers are also spread all over the world. I think there's more relays or more servers in the US and in Germany than anywhere else. The way Tor will pick which 3 relays to use is that it will look at which ones are offering the highest amount of bandwidth. So the more bandwidth, the higher the likelihood that you will use one of those servers. And right now, there's an organization in Germany called torservers.net, which essentially just takes, people can donate money, and the money will go into setting up more relays to grow the network. And so you're more likely to using one of those relays than some random relay in China, for example. Any questions on the Tor client part?
Yeah.
Okay.
The negotiation between each hop in that path, is that like per packet?
No, it sets up a circuit that's alive for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Or technically, it's per TCP session. So as long as that session is open, you will use the same 3 relays. If you have to make another connection, it will be through 3 new relays. Sure.
What happens if they catch you with a Tor browser in China?
So there's been this big discussion of whether or not Tor or VPN or any type of encryption software is illegal anywhere. And I know Iran has decided that this type of software is illegal. It doesn't specifically mention Tor, but it mentions encryption and things like that. But then again, in Iran, you can go to like your local kiosk and buy this like scratch card for a VPN service, and you can go use that. And so I don't know of anyone who's been arrested specifically for using Tor. If they have been arrested, it's probably because they're doing a lot of other things in addition to using Tor. So in some cases, I went to Istanbul a year and a half ago to train a group of local journalists. And I was standing there and I was talking about Tor and full disk encryption and OTR and all of these really cool things. And this lady in the back raises her hand and she goes, but isn't this a red flag? Isn't it safer for me to let the government snoop than for me to suddenly encrypt everything? Which might actually be the case. So it sort of really depends on who you are, where you are. Yeah. In the back?
I know that in China they don't really go after the end users of Tor, but they will aggressively shut down the relays and the bridge nodes when they can.
Yeah.
There is a concerted effort in China to identify Tor traffic.
So-
At least there used to be.
Yeah. So there's China and Iran are actually the two countries that are doing a very effective job at trying to block Tor. So let's say that you wanted to prevent someone from using Tor. There are a few different ways that you can do it. You can block the website, prevent people from getting the software. The Tor project sort of got around that by setting up mirrors and also setting up Get Tor, which allows you to get the Tor browser bundle via email. The next thing you can do is then to just block every single relay, because the list that your Tor client downloads is the same list that anyone can download, and so blocking the IP address of every single relay is pretty easy. So Tor came up with this concept of bridges, which is essentially just a relay. A bridge is just the first hop, and the IP address is just not publicly listed online, so you need to know about it to be able to use it. What happened after that was that, I believe it was China that did it first, but they came up with a signature for what does the SSL handshake look like between a Tor client and the first server. And then they blocked on that. So Tor then created something called pluggable transports, which essentially just takes the normal Tor traffic and just wraps it in another layer of something else. There are different pluggable transports, and it's just a way of making Tor look like not Tor on the wire. So unless you can find that new signature, Tor will still work. But in China and in Iran and some other countries, it means that people who want to use Tor need to jump through a couple of extra hoops to be able to do so. Because you can't just download the Tor browser and then it will magically work. You have to get the bundle, you have to get the right bundle, then you have to go and find that bridge, you have to use the right pluggable transport, and then it will work. Yes?
What's the most common pluggable transport used today?
Most common one today is OBFS3. There's a couple of other ones. I know someone wrote a paper to make Tor, describing how to make Tor look like Skype traffic, but I don't think that was ever deployed. I don't know what the status is. So yeah, some of you probably heard about the CERT, CMU, Carnegie Mellon researchers that claimed they could de-anonymize Tor users for $3,000. That was set to be presented at Black Hat. The talk was pulled. Lawyers claimed they did not have permission to release the material that they would talk about. I can now actually talk about what happened. So Black Hat announced this talk that two researchers claimed that they had found a way of de-anonymizing Tor users. They had found a way of de-anonymizing or finding the location of a Tor hidden service. And a Tor hidden service is It is a way of hosting internet content or an internet resource, like a website, over Tor, so that you have to use Tor to visit the website. You need to know this very specific URL to visit the site, and you cannot easily find the real IP address of the site, so you can't take it down either. And so these researchers claim that they've had found a way of finding the location of the server or finding the Tor users, and all it would do would be like $3,000 a month, and that was it. Now the problem here was Carnegie Mellon and CERT, if you're familiar with the history there, is they really advocate for responsible disclosure and for actually talking to the vendors and making sure that the issues are fixed before they go talk about it. That's not exactly what happened in this case. The Tor Project got in touch with them late June and got no reply. Then after some more poking, they're like, oh yeah, we'll show you what we have. It just needs to pass some internal stuff first. And a couple of weeks later, the Tor Project got some information, but then suddenly silenced, the talk was pulled, and the Tor Project was essentially forced to try and figure out exactly what had happened with some very limited information from these guys. So as I said, technically, so theoretically, assuming that a separate person is running all of these three, there is no one who can figure out who's using Tor to do what. Now, if you consider the case where the same person owns this server and this server, you have someone who can see that you're connecting to Tor and that someone is using Tor to visit google.com. So if you're setting up enough servers for a long enough period and you're patient enough, you can figure out who's using Tor to do what. And that is sort of what they did. It's actually a pretty neat attack. There's a recent blog post from a couple of weeks ago that on the Tor blog that explains pretty detailed how they did it and what they were maybe possibly able to do. That's sort of, we don't really know what affected means. So the relays that they were using for this attack were running for 5 months. So theoretically, anyone using Tor within those 5 months were affected, but we don't know what that means. Does it mean that they could see which websites you're browsing? Maybe. Does it mean that they could find the real IP address of a Tor hidden service? Maybe. Does it mean that they could see a source uploading documents to The Guardian? Hopefully not. And what the Tor project has done now is set up, there's an email list that will keep track of new relays joining the network. So when you set up a server in the Tor network, you can decide if it's going to be a exit relay, which is the third and final hop, or a non-exit relay, which means it's either the first or the second. And for this attack to work, you would need to set up a lot of servers, or at least like more than one, at least. And there's now a mailing list keeping track of servers joining the network. So if there's suddenly 50, 100 relays joining the network, at least someone can take a look and see, is this sketchy, is it not, what's the deal? Is there a question in the back?
Nope.
Okay. But so what happened in this case was that the researchers set up, I can't remember how many, but they set up a bunch of relays. And there was a discussion at the time about what are these relays? Is it a research project? Is it someone trying to attack the network? What's the deal? Because the challenge here is that we have 6,000 relays in the network. And at what point is 50 new relays a sketchy thing? Is 100 new relays a sketchy thing? Is 2,000 new relays a bit sketchy? At what point do you start looking into it? And at what point do you decide that it's probably okay? So that was sort of the short version of what happened. There's no real verification of who can set up a relay and who can't. Anyone can set up a relay. Anyone can join the network for how long. It's relatively easy to do. Yeah.
Has the Tor project figured out a mathematical threshold at which this attack becomes less effective or likely? second thing is, even if I didn't set up a relay, I compromise the machine that was relaying as effective as having set up my relays, correct?
So I think for the first one, it's not just the number of relays that matter, it's the bandwidth. Because you can set up 1,000 really, really slow relays, and as I said, Tor will use the bandwidth offered by each relay to decide which ones to pick. So if you're setting up 1,000 really slow relays, there's not going to be a high likelihood that they will actually be used. And so I don't think anyone's actually done the math on that yet.
Doesn't that mean you could also make a more attractive relay?
Yeah.
You could.
Yes.
If you set up really, really attractive high bandwidth relays and have them running for a few months.
Or the resources of the government.
Or a government, but then the government doesn't have to set up relays. The government can just watch these links. And supposedly that's what the NSA is doing. If you can watch any link all over the world all the time, you have what you need. But I think it's worth pointing out that this attack does not allow someone to target users. You get information on random users browsing a ton of random websites. You can't use it to target one specific person.
What if by getting control over a significant amount of the network that you're able to correlate some of the traffic and you also control an exit node, you inject something like the Beef project to track the user? Would that enable you to then target the user throughout the network even when he leaves your exit relay?
You can track specific users through the network in certain ways, but if you wanted to go after me specifically, that wouldn't work unless you somehow convince me to use your relay all the time.
Okay.
I think. Correct me if I'm wrong here. No? With persistent cross-site scripting vulnerabilities and the ability to hook the browser, even when he chooses a new connection, as long as he's got your JavaScript loaded and it's still functioning, then it doesn't really matter if you're going through because you're attacking at a different layer now. So it's more attacking the browser and the application level than attacking Tor. Yes.
But it's Tor that enabled it. And
So
it's
that's-
also Tor that enables you, through having the overview of the network, being able to go, I want to target that user, push that one through Beef proxy, let's see what he goes throughout the rest of the network, even after he's using my relay, or not using my relay.
But that assumes that you've specifically managed to locate that one Tor user who is that person you want to target.
Correct.
Yeah. And so there's two things I wanted to address. One was your question about if you compromise the relays. And that was a couple of years ago, was a guy that claimed he had hacked Tor. Turns out what he had done was look at the relays in the Tor network. And it is the case that if you do compromise a high number of them and have control, then you are in the same position as if you were actually running them yourself. The other thing with compromising Firefox specifically, so the Tor browser relies on Firefox. It's essentially just a Firefox plus some extra patches for some privacy security type stuff. And there are some attacks. There was one July last year, the FBI in the Freedom Hosting case, where Tor users to a specific, very sketchy website would be served with malware. This was possible because JavaScript is enabled by default in the Tor browser. And so in the case of SecureDrop, we do recommend users disable JavaScript before they do anything else on the site. Is there any other? Yeah.
So how is bandwidth verified? Like when peers report their bandwidth, is it by reputation or do they just say, hey, I have X amount of bandwidth?
So when you set up a relay in the network, you fill out this Tor configuration file and you say, here's my nickname, here's my IP address, here's my bandwidth. If you're an exit relay, you will say that I accept that people can exit to port 80 and 443, for example. And then it sends all this information to the 9 directory authorities. So these are servers that are run by the Tor project. And these servers will then each verify that information by some type of test. And then every hour they will vote on how accurate that information is. If more than half of the relays vote that yes, this information is accurate, then that relay is included in the consensus and users start using that relay.
So if I'm fast for those relays but slow for everyone else, then I can, or even drop their stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay.
How confident are you that the attack you saw was attributed to the CMU researchers? I mean, it definitely sounds like the most plausible explanation, but I'm wondering if you've gotten any further evidence to support this.
We have had no information from CERT CMU. I saw there was a spokesperson from CERT was quoted in some paper about the story saying we have nothing more to add. And so the way they did the attack was that they managed to inject a tag essentially that easier let them track traffic that they could view. But they did it in such a way that anyone monitoring any of the traffic could see the same tags, including, say, the NSA. And so while the Tor Project and the blog post wrote, we really hope that this was CERT CMU, because otherwise we don't really know who it was. So, okay. So I already covered a lot of this. Components within the Tor Browser client, I use it with the Tor Browser patch version of Firefox plus the Tor software. A relay is a computer with the Tor software configured to run as a non-exit or exit relay. A hidden service is a computer with the Tor software configured to act as a hidden service plus whatever additional services the operator wants to have. And I think, okay. So, I'm trying to remember my slides here. So, a lot of times when you talk about using Tor and you talk about how to use Tor the right way, step number one is just to not talk about what you're doing or how you're doing it. If you're not giving people any information about what you're doing or how you're doing it, it's less likely that they can take advantage of that. As James Clapper famously said, people miscommunicate, they will make mistakes, and we will exploit them. And that is, for example, in the Silk Road case, at least the evidence so far suggests that the alleged operator was a bit too excited about his project, a bit too confident about his ability to secure his service. He talked a bit too much, trusted people a bit too much, and that is how he ended up getting caught. Another one is to not stand out. So Tor developers will often say that anonymity loves company. And it's sort of the case that if you assume that every one of those 1 million Tor users have just downloaded the Tor browser and not changed anything, then they will all look the same on the web. If you try and fingerprint their browser, they will look the same. If you can look at the traffic, they will look the same. But the second you start changing something, the second you install a separate plugin, or you're choosing to only use Tor exit relays in Germany, you change Tor's behavior and also the way you look on the wire in different ways that the Tor project and I guess the community, the academic research community, has yet to figure out exactly what this means. It is clear that you will stand out in some way because you're not looking like any other Tor user, but how this will impact your anonymity and whether or not it is actually safe to do is still an open research question. So some of you have probably seen this slide. The NSA in 2012 apparently had spent some time trying to break Tor failed at doing so and created a presentation that they called Tor Stinks. I think it is interesting to see that they failed. I think it's also interesting to note that this was 2012. We don't really know exactly what they're doing now. But as I pointed out earlier, the NSA wouldn't have to run relays, even though they did for a month actually using Amazon EC2. They could just watch all the links. And then on top of that, they would just get a whole lot of random traffic. If you want to target very specific users, it is really hard to do so using Tor. So this is a illustration that the EFF put together to try and show how Tor works if you're also using HTTPS and all the different points along the way where your traffic can be or is intercepted. So, for example, your ISP will always know that you're using Tor. It is pretty easy to look up. You can do different things, like if you're using pluggable transports, it's not immediately clear that you're using Tor unless your ISP decides to dig a little deeper and try and figure out what you're doing. But it's not possible to 100% hide the fact that you're using Tor. The 3 Tor relays, assuming you're using HTTPS, will only see, the first one will see that you are using Tor, the last one will see you're visiting google.com, for example, but not what you're searching for. And anyone watching the traffic in between, if they get enough traffic, they might be able to figure out that you're using Tor to visit google.com. If they get less, they'll just see that it is someone using Tor. So as I mentioned earlier, I had filed a FOIA with the FBI for documents mentioning Tor, Silk Road, and Bitcoin. And what I got back was heavily redacted documents, but it was this FBI bulletin from the Counterterrorism Division talking about how Tor was run by the EFF, which is not the case. EFF funded Tor way back when and also hosted their website for a while, but the EFF has never run the Tor network. And how Bitcoin is used by extremists because they're really struggling to get money these days, so they're using Bitcoin instead to buy all their stuff. And it sort of became clear that this sort of explains why law enforcement often only, when they hear about Tor, they only hear about the bad stuff. They don't hear about how Tor can be used for a lot of good things as well, and that there's a lot of legitimate reasons for why you might actually want to use Tor, or why you might want to use Bitcoin for that matter. I think this was end of June, beginning of July, and there was a story in a German paper about the X key score rules for targeting Tor and Tails specifically. So Tails is a live Linux distro that you can put on a USB stick or a DVD, and when you boot it up, everything you do is automatically configured to go through Tor. And when you shut it down, it will wipe the memory so there's no trace of what you did, or even the fact, maybe, even the fact that you used Tails. And so in this case, it says that according to the X key score rules, Tails is a ComSec mechanism advocated by extremists on extremist forums.
Like Boing Boing.
Sure, like Boing Boing. But I have also seen there's Israeli extremist forums that have like full-on long how-tos on how to use Tor and how to use Tails. And so yes, sketchy people are using Tor and Tails to do sketchy things. In this case, it seems the NSA is using this as an excuse to specifically target this tool and its users. Which sort of brings me to SecureDrop. So as I said, it's an open source whistleblower submission system. It was originally created by Aaron Schwartz and a few other people. I can't remember the original name. I don't know, it was Strongbox. That was probably what the New Yorker installed. Was it Deadrop?
Yeah, maybe it was.
Might be Deadrop. Okay. So it's been around for a year and a half, 2 years now. And the idea is that a journalist organization will set up this system in their own offices, and it is using Tor in such a way that a source will need to use Tor to be able to visit their sites and upload documents, and the journalists need to use Tor to then also log in and check for documents and also communicate with the source. So this is the detailed diagram of how SecureDrop works and what the flow is. We're making a couple of changes to the new release. It's mostly accurate. So if you're a source, if you're a whistleblower, you first need to find, I don't know if I have a slide, I do have a slide. So you first need to find, say you have information about something and you want to securely give this to someone and you want to use SecureDrop. On the Freedom of the Press website, there's the official SecureDrop directory, which lists all the organizations currently using SecureDrop, and all the way on the far right, their Tor hidden service address. So if you then use Tor to visit one of these .onion sites, you will come to a page that looks a bit like the cropped image there. You click on Submit Documents, and you will then get a code name that if you want to log back in later and check for responses and communicate with the journalist, you can then keep this code name. Or you can just totally ignore it, go to the next step and upload the documents. So you upload documents and everything's good. The journalist, at least right now, will not get any sort of alert that documents have uploaded. So there are people that are once a day or once every day will actually go and check for responses, which means that they take their computer, which is running Tails, the system that you can do it all from a USB stick or a DVD, connect to the journalist side of this website and check for new documents or new responses. If there is a new document, it can be downloaded on a USB stick and then decrypted, because when you upload it, it is automatically encrypted to the journalist's key. So you can decrypt it. You can then take it to a secure viewing station, which is another machine running Tails off the network. It does not have a wireless card. It does not really have any other network cards. Does not have a hard drive, and view the documents there. So if there was a piece of malware, you wouldn't really be able to do much unless we're talking about something very sophisticated. Because this machine is not connected to the internet, and as soon as you take the USB stick with Tails out, the system will reboot, the memory will wipe, and there's no trace left. And from there on, the journalist can sort of try and work on the documents, take some screenshots, take some notes. When they're ready to write the story, they can go to their own computer, write up the story, and publish it. And so a lot of this is all happening over Tor. There's also this admin workstation interface. That's the admin, the IT admin within the media organization that will have a machine that is using Tails or just SSH over Tor, and a smartphone with Google Authenticator or a YubiKey to connect to the interface to update packages or upgrade SecureDrop or do any one of those tasks, add more journalists, and things like that.
What's the percentage of law enforcement going after these on-site publications?
So far, I have not heard of any case where law enforcement has gone after a SecureDrop instance. So as I mentioned, there's 12 right now. And I know there's a number of organizations that have been in touch wanting to set up an instance as well. But I mean, there was the case in the UK where the GCHQ came to The Guardian and wanted to watch them destroy the laptop with the Snowden files that they had. So it's not to say that something won't happen in the future, but For example, in some cases, we suggest that you have, so the machine running, or the machines, because there's two, running SecureDrop, it's recommended that you have those machines physically in your office, ideally in your general counsel's office. So far, I haven't heard of anyone that's actually run into legal problems with it. Yet, yeah. So, if you want to help out, if you want to help Freedom of the Press Foundation, you can donate, that'd be great. There's a new crowdfunding bundle that will come up probably next week, where I had, about 6 months ago, I filed a FOIA with the FBI asking for the file of this guy named William Davidon. So he was said to be the mastermind behind the 1971 break-in of an FBI office. Pennsylvania, yeah. And so he passed away in December last year. The FBI responded and said that they have roughly 35,000 pages, and they wanted me to pay $1,000 to get it. So, starting next week, we are going to try and crowdfund the money that we need to get those documents.
So I'll talk to you afterwards, but I have some connections in crowdfunding.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Another thing that would be fantastic is if you write Python and you have some free time, there are bugs that need to be fixed. If you're not a programmer, there's a lot of the work that I have done over the past 2 months that I've been with Freedom of the Press is write documentation. Write documentation for how to compile your own Ubuntu kernel with GR security and how to install SecureDrop in the first place. And so just setting up a virtual machine and just going through those instructions and checking if everything actually works, if everything makes sense, would be fantastic as well. So there's a lot of different things that you can help with if you want to get involved. And that's it. Thank you. Easy. I got global entry. Global entry means when you're coming back into the US, you don't have to stand in the immigration line. You can just go to the automated machine, scan your passport, it takes your photo, and prints the receipts. And then you take the receipt to customs and they sort of just look at it in your turn.
You guys, can you keep it down in case there's any questions?
I thought I heard something.
You guys have any questions here at all?
I don't know how effective
Got one.
Hang on.
Yeah. I don't know how effective it would be from the second relay to the active, but like, I don't know, maybe instead of relaying your traffic to one node initially, maybe you do 5 or something, right? But maybe not all 5 actually go to the second layer. But I mean, you know, that makes assumptions about what your attacker can see and cannot see. But have you looked at anything like that?
Of expanding the number of hops from 3 to 5?
No, from like, as far as traffic analysis goes, just making it statistically harder to see like where the traffic's going by adding traffic. Like it could be arbitrary, almost random traffic.
Not more hops, but just like in parallel.
Right.
The downside to that is you're going to pay a penalty in terms of speed if you use a Tor.
Oh, definitely.
So every single Tor cell is the same size, but there's no. I think there's some randomness that's introduced in terms of like delaying the packets, but there's not a lot of padding that's done right now, and so every single change that you make into how Tor sends the traffic through those 3 hops will come at some cost to the users.
Yeah.
And users aren't very forgiving.
Right.
If Tor is slow or if Tor is hard to use, they don't fully understand that this is done to actually better protect you. And so in terms of just traffic analysis and onion routing, there's a whole community that is doing this. The Privacy Enhancing Technology Symposium, PETS, that's organized every year, is a great academic conference to go to if you're interested in this type of research and this topic.
Cool, thank you.
Do we have an online question or?
No online questions, but there's a few in the audience here.
Okay, sure.
So how do you get people who are not interested in security so much or even have a particular offset goal in mind to use Tor? Because I think it may go along with what he asked to increase the number of traffic. Tor likes a lot of traffic that is innocuous because that just is more to sift through.
Yeah.
So I mean, from a user interface perspective, it's, you know, like how do you convince someone to use Tor when they don't really need to?
I think it's a really, it's a good question because it's sort of, you know, how do I get my mom to use Tor? For me, it was how do I get my sister to use Tor? And she never really understood what I do until at one point she went to China for a month, and my dad was asking her, well, how are you going to keep in touch with your friends in Norway? And she was like, oh, it's easy, I'll go on Facebook. And he says, but Facebook is blocked. And her jaw dropped, and he's like, what? And then I, jumped in, helpfully explained about Tor, and she used it in China. She uses it every now and then because she now sees the value in the tool. And so I think it is really hard to convince someone to use Tor unless they're already in a place where they understand why they should do so. Even if just for specific sites or for a certain time period.
It's a larger question about privacy.
Yeah.
What do I need my privacy?
Yeah, exactly. I have nothing to hide. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if you provide any documentation or tools to help potential whistleblowers sanitize documents that they want to upload using SecureDrop, so that what they do doesn't reveal who they are.
Yeah, there's a sort of source best practice guide that we're currently working on that will try and explain both metadata, removing traces from documents, the importance of going to a coffee shop where you haven't been before, use their free Wi-Fi, and all of these things. But then there's sort of two challenges there. One is sort of legally, it is one thing to go out and just create a solution that can be used for whistleblowing, and another to go out and say you should read this document to leak. Another challenge is, even if we were to write this document, how do we make sure that people find it at the right time and read it in a safe manner, right? But we are working on that type of documentation. We are working on more talks and more trainings geared towards just general operational security that will also include that component.
Does Tor have a way to check their Tor servers on the network for vulnerabilities? How healthy the network itself is?
There was a big discussion a couple of years ago. Someone proposed, let's port scan every single relay in the Tor network and report our findings to the relay operators or to the public, and then also maybe helpfully get in touch and suggest that we help them patch the issues. And that became a pretty hot topic for a lot of people. Some people were really against it and felt like just because I'm setting up this server to be a part of the Tor network and helping out does not mean that it's okay for you to port scan me and look for vulnerabilities. And so Tor and this model, this 3-hop model, tries to take advantage of the fact that the likelihood, like you will likely use servers in 3 different countries, hopefully owned by 3 different people. The chances that they will collude or that 3 nation states will collude to de-anonymize you specifically is very unlikely. I think there are easier methods of going after one specific person than trying to do it via Tor.
Does Tor work with all versions of Firefox?
That is a good question. No.
Well, you could, if you want the nice package that all works, you want Tor Browser, which is based on a specific version of Firefox. It's not Firefox pure.
So she works on for the Tor project as well, developing the Tor Browser and has done a fantastic job in the past couple of years. And so I think technically you can make it work if you really want to, but most likely you don't want to. That's where
We want to make it easier for you to just, we want to
Yeah.
make it easy for you to use the Tor browser and be secure in many different ways to not give away your identity.
And the Tor browser has, you do a great job. Tor browser's got a lot of other tools built into it. So for example, you have your choice of research sites. So you can pull down, there's the start page, which is the default on it. But you've got DuckDuckGo built in there, which is, more secure, which is a secure search site. There's just a lot of stuff built in there. NoScript is on by default.
And there's more features coming that will further make it better.
Additionally, older versions of Firefox could expose you to browser-based vulnerabilities,
Yes.
like the one the FBI exploited.
Yes.
Yes. So you wouldn't want to use an old version of Firefox anyway.
But technically, the Tor protocol will take anything that's TCP. So if you hack on it a bit, you can pipe any TCP traffic through Tor.
There's other browsers coming out there talking about supporting Tor Aviator.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
But I don't know how, beyond the forums, I mean, I don't know how serious they are about that. I mean, you can configure it, it's just not trivial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pro information.
Have there been any DDoS attacks on the Tor network? Because it seems because of the replication of traffic are these essential and stuff like that.
It's a good question. Because DDoSing, what part of it?
The relays.
I don't know.
So
What would the goal be?
just to shut it down.
Just.
Slow it down, make
But then, if you shut down one relay, then.
Well, yeah, you do all of them because you get 3 out of any attack.
Yeah, but there's sort of 6,000. I don't know actually.
Yeah.
I can't remember there being anyone. I think if anyone were to do it at the scale that you would need to do it, we would probably know about it. Hopefully, I think. But yeah, there's probably been some people that have had some issues because. If you set up a Tor relay, your IP address is publicly available online. It is known. There's people port scanning. There's people trying to hack you. There's people trying to do all sorts of things. So.
Did you guys ever charge for SecureDrop to support its further development?
It's sort of an idea that we're playing with. Because the way the SecureDrop deployments are done is that someone is physically on site for 2-3 days, setting up the system, training the people that need to use it, training the sysadmin, and also maintaining it, helping with support in the future. I don't think there's any SLA right now for those types of issues. And that will be, in the future, will be my job to go and do, and I really want to have an SLA in place.
Can you spin up, just like have like a EC2 AMI that people can spin up, or is it more complicated than that?
You could technically make that work, but the whole idea with SecureDrop is we assume that even if your network is compromised, the SecureDrop instance is so segregated from everything else that it's not going to be touched. Mm-hmm. You would need to be physically in the office or find some really neat hack in Tor to get it to work. And so in the future, the goal is that some of the bigger media organizations or bigger companies will pay either for the setup or for support or something like that. Yes?
Let's say you're super paranoid or wanting more speed or something. Is there a way to configure more than 3 or less than 3 nodes, or is it always 3 relays?
I know Moxie wrote a script that would allow you to just have one hop.
It's called the internet.
If you want to do that. Nice. But I don't think it works anymore. I think there is, technically, you should be able to have more hops, but that just adds more delays, and there's nothing to show that it will actually give you any more anonymity or security to it.
I think it's being researched, and I would I thought there was something, it might even make you less because you're getting possibly, one of the relays might be your nemesis, you know? So
Yeah.
it's possible it's worse to do more, but it's still being researched, I believe.
Yeah, so there's freehaven.org, I think it's .org. Freehaven.org, there's the Anon Bib collection of any paper you've ever wanted to read on in-routing, on attacks, on defending and attacking the Tor network specifically. It's just a collection of papers on this. So if that's something that you're interested in, then I highly recommend going to check out those papers.
What's the URL?
It's freehaven.org. I can't remember the full URL, but Anon BIB. If you just Google for that in Freehaven, you should be able to find it. On DuckDuckGo.
Have there been other use cases besides like press-related leaks that you guys have heard about, or SecureDrop, like, I don't know, like dropping node on vendors, or like other types of things that might want to be released that it wouldn't be a member of the press who's setting this up?
I have talked to someone who wants to use this for not media-related type news. So maybe in like the next 6 months, I'll actually have a better answer to that question. But
Cool.
I've been waiting for someone to actually want to use the system for O-days or something else, not media-related stuff. Yes, Mark.
Is there kind of a minimum level of security concern that you work with certain journalists? Like I had a journalist from Wall Street Journal who's actually, as of 3 weeks ago, running Windows XP still. And as of we know, all of his reporting on like computer fraud and crime and everything. He's getting worried that he's going to be owned, which is I think pretty reasonable at this point. He's slightly older. But so if he contacts you, will you be able to help him? Would you say secure are some resources? Like what level do you or someone like you get involved to actually help a journalist get to that point where they understand operational security?
So I guess the answer is that it depends on how we're interacting with this journalist. If this journalist is someone who's going to have access to a SecureDrop instance, then it is a couple of days of training on sort of threat modeling and Tor and Tails and SecureDrop and why we're doing all of these things in the first place and why it is crucial that the SecureDrop system is so segregated on the network and all of these different things. It is a goal that in the future we'll also do more general training sessions for just groups of journalists. And then finally, if you sort of know someone who makes an introduction, then someone might be nice enough to take an evening and explain all of these things.
Does Wall Street Journal have a SecureDrop at this point?
That is a good question. I can't remember.
No.
I don't think they do, no.
Okay, that's probably why he's out of the loop on this.
You should suggest that they get one.
I believe the Wall Street Journal is owned by the same people that own Fox.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
Then they might never get one.
So it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
I was going to say the evil empire, but Rupert Murdoch.
Do you guys do any like active networking, trying to find people who might be trying to whistleblow or something like that? Like, do you have contacts with unions or anything like that?
Not right now, no. I think that was sort of reminds me of a conversation I had on Twitter where someone was suggesting why not go to all of these government agencies and put a poster and says, we want your documents. But that's sort of, it becomes sort of like a legally interesting question. There's one thing to set up and just provide the ability, the tool to do this, and another one to actually encourage people to commit crimes.
I don't want to go all Ken Thompson on you, but how do you find this site?
That is on the Freedom of the Press website.
Okay.
Easy to find.
So
But yeah.
you're not worried about people middling that, and then you end up landing on this site, which is actually someone else's site, and you end up submitting documents to fake.
It could happen. So related to that, actually, I don't know if anyone's on the Tor Browser or Tor Talk mailing list, but there was Tor Browser bundle.org. Someone set up a website on that domain, and the website looks exactly like the Tor Project websites. And there's a Tor Browser bundle there that you can download. So someone actually took the bundle and managed to reverse engineer it and figure out that it was Tor, but in addition to being Tor, it would also take screenshots and take some notes and send some logs and do all of these things. And according to the blog post I read, the guy who reversed it also tracked down the bot masters and allegedly someone in China that claimed that they had set up this website to catch pedophiles. So they had set up the website, they had created this fake bundle, and then gone on to sketchy forums to say, hey, look, here's this tool, go use this, and then try to catch some people that way. So
Wasn't it also written in BB?
I don't know, was it?
I didn't think so. I saw the
Nice
same
one.
reverse, like a CLI.
Creative. But yeah, so it could happen. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. There are also people that, so this list is organizations that Freedom of the Press Foundation has worked with directly. There are also organizations that themselves decide that we're going to set up SecureDrop and actually take the time to figure out how to do it and just do it on their own. So there are sites out there that we don't really know about that exist. And so there are probably some not so official ones too.
Do you guys recommend any kind of, you like to publish like public keys too so that people can encrypt their documents before they sort of transit Tor? Or?
So there's, when you go to one of the .onion links and you click I want to submit documents, you get your code name. After that, before you upload, there's a link to the journalist's public key. So at that point you can encrypt, but there is no, right now there's no information there explaining why you might want to, how you do it.
How hard can it be?
Yeah, exactly. So.
Cool. If there's no other questions, give Runa a nice round of applause.